Welcome back to Urban Traditionalists. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We are doing a gear dump. Gear dumps are normally a term referred to your bug out bag or hunting bag, your camping bag, basically your gear. And you dump it all on the table and kind of go over what you carry in the woods or backcountry or as a survivalist in order to tackle the elements or what you might come across or just bushcrafting, whatever. So we're going to kind of steal that term today, gear dump, and we're going to apply it to food preservation, particularly canning. I'm going to do another gear dump video in relation to dehydrating, so watch for that. But today we're going to be talking specifically about canning and all the gear you need to pull that off. So if you're brand new to canning, this will be a great video for you to understand what you need and actually what you don't need. If you're intermediate, maybe you might learn something you don't already know. And if you're an expert, leave a comment below and tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what you use. And I'm always happy to learn of things and improve my setup. So to start us off here, this is probably the canner everyone is familiar with, the water bath canner. This is probably what your grandma had and what you're most familiar with seeing. Big, was it aluminum? What are these things made of? Enamel pot. And they're essentially tall enough in order to put a whole quart jar in with a headspace of water. And you can typically fit about 7 jars in these. Now, this is one I've had forever. I thrifted it way back in the day. I wouldn't mind a new one. You can get them a little taller, which I would prefer because this spills water all the time when it's boiling heavily. And that kind of bothers me. So I think I might upgrade soon and get a taller one just to mitigate that spillover when I'm canning. Inside these pots, you will have a canning rack. I simply despise this thing. Does anyone else? Do people still use these? I'm sure people do. I hate them. What they do is they're meant to rest on the top of the pot, and then you take your jars and they sit in the rack. And you can sterilize them in the hot water, and then you use the rack. You can fill them in here, and then you kind of take your rack and you lower all your jars down, and then you use this to pull them out at the end of the canning session. The reason I hate this thing is I have broken more jars using this rack than any other complication. And the reason being is these racks just barely fit these fat mason jars. You can see that one, it doesn't actually fit at all. I have to force it in. And so when you have 7 jars in there all pushing up against each other, they break, they crack. I can probably tell you of 4 different stories where I broke jars in these. I'll just put it against the black there so you can see. They just aren't big enough, in my opinion. And so I stopped using this a long time ago. I don't miss it. I simply just put my jars straight in here and straight on the bottom, which, you know, most people don't recommend, but I would rather find some sort of rack to just sit in the bottom than use that rack. And then you can use your jar grabber to just lower them and pull them out. So I hate the jar rack. This is the old school water bath canner, which you're probably familiar with. You cannot can everything in here. It has to do with acidity levels. So this is more for like fruits, jams, jellies, your relishes, pickling, salsa, that sort of thing. The more complicated foods like potatoes and soups, homemade soups, meat, that sort of thing, that all gets pressure canned. Even green beans would be a pressure can item. All right, so that's your water bath canner. Nice little segue into the pressure canner. So pressure canners are a lot more expensive, but they are worth their weight in gold. Speaking of weight, you can get them with a weighted gauge or a dial gauge. You can also get them with both, which is what I highly recommend. This is the all-American 21 quart pressure canner. The 21 quart references how much water you can fit in here. So we've actually made, like at Christmas time, we actually did our turkey stock in here. And so that's like 21 quarts of liquid we're talking about. When it actually comes to filling it, I believe it's, I'm going to say 18 pints that can fit in this because you can actually double stack them. Or again, 7 quart jars fit in this guy. You can get them bigger. I'm not sure I really see the need. This is a great size. I would actually rather have 2 of these than one bigger one. And if you've never seen one before, they do kind of twist and lock the lid. So you can see right there, it's locked on. And then when you're using it, these toggles come up into place and secure it down. We will have videos going over pressure canning and what have you, so stay tuned for those. The reason why a weighted gauge and dial gauge is really, I find, necessary is because you have to pressure can at a certain poundage depending on your elevation. Where we are, we have to pressure can at 15 pounds of pressure. There's a little 15 on here, a 5 and a 10. And then this actually also tells you your pressure. So you can go by both. I prefer the dial because it's very accurate, and then the weighted gauge is just simply confirmation. This weighted gauge is actually also what controls your pressure, because when there's too much pressure in the pot, this thing starts rattling and letting pressure out. And then it sits, and then when there's too much pressure, it rattles. So when people refer to that rattling, that's what they're talking about. Some people go just by this. They don't have a dial, but I say get both. Why make the mistake? In here, there's a couple racks. They both look the same, so I won't pull them out. And that's essentially, you keep one in the bottom all the time, and then if you're double stacking, you put one of these on top of your jars, and then another round of jars. Working these things is a lot more complicated than your water bath canner. There are a lot of very specific steps that you do not compromise on ever. That's why people say pressure canning is so dangerous, is because you compromise on the steps and it just gets messy. Don't do it. So we will have videos on pressure canning. We'll be using this exact pressure canner, but we're just going over gear. So that is your pressure canner. Moving on. These aren't necessary, but I definitely find them helpful. And this is just fruit processing equipment. So this is a cherry pitter, a six cherry pitter. So your cherries go in here, you slam this down, all your pits end up in the bottom. Stuff like this is really helpful when you are working on high quantities of food. I only have the cherry pitter and then the apple core. If you know of other really good things to use in order for quick food processing, I'm into it. We do have a mandolin. That's obviously very helpful. I don't have it out here, but we do have a mandolin, which is amazing for dehydrating. This little guy here is an apple core. I got this at a thrift store, and it was like one of my best finds ever. Essentially, you pull those little tines or spikes back, you pop your apple on here, and then through this guy, you wind it forward all the way through a peeler, which is here, and then this guy at the end cores it. I do have a video showing dehydrating apples where I use this, so you can kind of see that in action. So just things to help process food a bit quicker. Obviously, if you're doing a lot of food all at once, which is typically how you do things, it can get really tedious processing. The next thing I'll go over are these little gimmicky things for canning. This is a jar grabber. This is invaluable. You definitely need one of these. You can buy them separately. They do come in kits, which I'm going to go over in a minute. But essentially, this is what you're going to be using to lower your jars into the hot water and pull them out and put it on a towel in order to cool. So there's really no other way to be grabbing the jars because you don't want to be tipping the jars everywhere and compromising that seal. You really need to be pulling them straight out and straight down. Again, this was a thrifted purchase. I think I even paid like 50 cents for it or something ridiculous. A lot of thrift stores may not even know what this is, and so they just throw it in kitchen utensils. But if you can find one, especially an older one, they're made really, really well. It'll last you forever. I've probably had this 15 years. Another little gimmicky thing is this little plastic handle with a magnet on the bottom. The reason this is helpful is because you can pull your lids out of your boiling water, which is where they're getting sanitized, without touching them, so your hands aren't in and out. I'm sure you could use many things to grab them, but a little magnet just really does the trick, and it also works on your rims. So that's super helpful. They're super cheap, and essentially just a magnet on a stick. Have that. The next thing is a funnel. Now, this one is the one I definitely recommend. It's silicone, so it pops out like that. And the reason I like that is because for storage purposes, it just takes up less room. I'm not a fan of having a bunch of gimmicky stuff that just sits around and takes up space. This is actually a pain in the butt to store. But this, because it folds down, it's just way way easier to store and makes it very accessible. Obviously, you pop that out, and then this is for filling your jars. So you just rest that in the top, and then you're filling your jars. The reason I also recommend this one is because of this wide opening on the top. A lot of other funnels just have a circular top. When you've got your pot of jam and you're pouring it out, how often does that pour in a nice little fountain of, or a waterfall, shall we say, of jam? It doesn't. It pours like this, right? So you got wide jam coming out at the top and it's funneling down. So these wider brims here tend to catch that jam or whatever it is you're pouring and then funnels it down. Where when you're dealing with something like this, okay, that's just a circle, it's not going to catch that fall. You have to be a lot more careful with how you pour that. So I really like this one because it's silicone, so it kind of like hugs to the jar a little bit. It's not plastic and sliding around. It obviously compacts. And then you've got the wider opening at the top. So highly recommend this guy. I do recommend you purchase all these things separately. Ooh, there it goes. Because you can get the ones you want. There is another little gimmick that I don't have because it broke. And that is a headspace ruler. So they look like these little plastic rulers, and then the bottom of the ruler has like little stairs to it. And the idea is that you put the stair edge on your lip and it measures 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. The reason I don't use that anymore is because, well, it broke. And the second reason is this is about 1 inch right there. So your lip of the jar is about 1 inch. So if it says to leave 1 inch headspace, you're leaving that headspace right there. If it says to leave 1/2 inch, that's half your jar lip. 1/4 inch is 1/4 of your jar lip. So you don't need a measuring stick to tell you that length. It's right there for you. If you feel like that's something you want just to be really, really certain, go for it. I don't use it anymore. Now, you can buy kits with all of this stuff in it. So you see we've got our little stick with our magnet on it, which is good because when that one breaks, I'll probably just move to this one. That comes with a funnel, obviously your jar grabber, right? But then it also comes with things that I never use. Like, what are we using tongs for? I don't know. I've never used these canning. And then it also comes with this. I'm pretty sure this is to tighten your lids, but you never want your lids tighter than just finger tight. So this is actually going to ranch them on too hard. Now, maybe people use this to take lids off of like processed jars because they can be quite sticky, but I don't know. I have no use for this. Tongs. Every kitchen has tongs. Why are you providing me tongs? What do you want me to use them for? I don't know. I don't use them. Your funnel is not very good. It's really narrow. I don't like it. And then this is actually quite poor quality. We used it once and hated it and moved back to good old faithful thrift store purchase over here. So you can buy kits where it's like everything you need for canning, but really it's very garbage and poorly made and we don't use it anyway. So I don't recommend kits. I recommend just buying what you need and when you need it. That's my rant on that. Next. When I'm canning, I need a ton of rags. We have a lot of kitchen rags we keep in the kitchen all the time. This is actually pretty well full because they're all clean right now. When I can, I use about half of these because you don't want to be contaminating things with dirty rags. So I'm always pulling a clean rag, pulling a clean rag. Especially when it comes to pressure canning, you do sterilize the top of your jars, depending on what you're canning, whether it be meat particularly, with vinegar, like just pure vinegar and a clean rag. And you want a super clean rag for that. If I'm actually doing multiple rounds of canning, I'll like use one rag to clean all the jars, throw that in the laundry. Next round of canning, a new rag comes out. You will go through a lot of these, like a lot. So you want a lot of clean rags on hand. Next, obviously, you need your jars. This is a quart jar. A pint jar is half the size, and then it gets into tiny little jam jars. I do can in these as much as possible, as you can see behind me. And then when it comes to my jams, that's when I use the pints. I don't like using jars smaller than these because you go through them really, really quickly, and then you're just left with a bunch of empty jars. This is as small as I like to go. You can also do bigger batches that way. Obviously, lids and rims. There's all kinds of controversy out there about whether or not you can reuse these. It's pretty clear that you can reuse your rims so long as they're not showing any rust. These are actually showing a tiny bit of rust, so these are probably ones that are going to get chucked. People say never, never, never reuse your lids, and that's actually what like FDA boards and such say too. There are a lot of rebels out there, me included, who do reuse lids. I will never ever reuse a lid when pressure canning. Always brand new lids. But if I'm doing jams or salsa, that will typically get a used lid, but it can never be dinged. There can be no dings on it and no rust. So it has to show as a perfect lid. So you want to be careful when you're pulling your lids off, not to ding them too much. So the kind of last things I really like to keep a lot of on hand all the time, because I hate going to the grocery store to pick stuff up when I'm in the middle of canning, is sugar. This is just my, accessible sugar container. I actually have like probably 20 pounds of just bagged sugar on hand. You go through a lot of sugar when you're canning. So sugar, another alternative is honey. I have not canned a lot with honey. Honey is extremely expensive, but it will create a bit of a healthier alternative if you want to preserve that way. Vinegar. I keep so much vinegar on hand. This is mainly for pickling and what have you, but again, just for sanitization and cleaning the rims and such, you always want to have a lot of vinegar on hand. And then, of course, your pickling salt or kosher salt or sea salt, depending on what you're doing. So lots and lots of salt. I like to keep that on hand as well. The other thing would be lemon juice, which I don't have out here. So when it's kind of coming into canning season, these are things I make sure I have a lot of. I actually don't have a pectin box out here. Another thing would be pectin, the little pectin boxes. I stock up on all that stuff like in May and June, like well before canning season begins, because come canning season, that stuff starts to fly off the shelves, and our just mentality and mindset is to buy it when you don't need it so that you have it when you do. And that's not in a hoarding sense. That's in a sense of like, oh, I know I'm going to be canning in 2 months' time and canning a lot. So I stock up on sugar and vinegar and salt and pectin, lemon juice, like in the spring, so that come summer, I just have it on hand. The other thing too is when I come home with 30 pounds of peaches and I'm exhausted and sweaty from having picked them all in the orchard, I don't want to have to now go to the grocery store to go buy canning stuff. I just want to get home and get into it. So I make sure that all that stuff is on hand all the time. Well, that about sums it up for the Gear Dump Canning Edition. I hope you learned something. Leave a comment below if I missed something. I'm always keen to learn of something new. Hopefully you kind of got a good idea of what you need to have on hand. It's really not a lot of gear, and you can really store a lot of this stuff, inside your canners as well when you're not using it. So you really just got to have a good place to store these guys, and the rest is pretty easy. So I hope that encourages you to get into food preservation and canning. Let me know in the comments what you think and if I missed anything. And then we'll also do a gear dump for dehydration as well. All right, guys, thanks for watching Urban Traditionalists. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Being a new channel, that kind of stuff means a lot to us, really helps us get our channel out there. And we always appreciate the interaction on YouTube. So thanks, and we'll catch you on the next video.